So I thought I'd share some of my experience with teaching a standardbred to canter on cue. Usually I try to canter them on the ground before I start doing it in the saddle, because I find that especially standardbreds and other driving horses are so in tune with the voice commands, and that really helps when you try to teach them the canter on cue from the saddle, and of course with everything else that you want to teach them. I often lunge my horses at liberty. I have another video on how to train at liberty, which you might want to check out if you're interested. But anyway, today I wanted to talk about the prerequisites for getting canter from a standardbred. Most standardbreds will canter if you give them the chance to understand what you're asking of them. And once you have their attention, you'll probably find that they'll be so willing to do what you're asking them to do. If you get that communication right, then you will have no problem with getting your horse to canter, okay? So let's look at 3 different horses and their abilities. In these video clips, I have already warmed them up, so I'm not going to talk too much about warming up and stuff in this video. So standardbreds all come in different conformations and with different abilities, and their canters are widely different, just like any other horse. It's so individual, and you're going to see that with the 3 horses I'm presenting in this video, that all of them are such different types of horses, and they have different ways of moving, but one thing they do have in common: they do listen. They are so humble, and I try to train a lot at liberty and communicate with them, and this is a big advantage in my training. Here with the 17-2 hand standardbred gelding, who I started schooling as a 6-year-old. Before this, he had a racing career and he wasn't schooled to the canter cue. I took him on to school and to do some show jumping with, and as you can see, he's very pacey. He had about 98% American blood in his pedigree, and these standardbreds tend to have more pacing genes. And you can really see how pacey the canter is. Here we're switching circles, and I'm trying to get him to trot in between changing leads, but he actually mostly paces. So you can see how his hooves barely leave the ground when he is cantering, but he is listening really well to me, and he's trying his best, and I'm so used to riding this horse at this point in time that it isn't even distracting to me to ride a pacey horse. I rode this horse almost every day for a number of years, and I just got used to it. But even when I tried to strengthen him and muscle him up and improve his canter, it really didn't get much better. And yes, since I rode this horse, I have developed as a rider, and there is strengthening work that I do with my horses now, which I didn't do with this horse until quite late, which made him a bit more supple and balanced. But his canter would always have this pacey quality to it. I couldn't really get rid of that, and it was just how he was. And as I say, I did get used to it. A bit later in this video, I'm going to show you this horse jumping. He was really good at jumping and enjoyed it, but his canter was always a bit of a limitation. But again, study this pacey canter for a moment and then compare it to the next 2 horses that I'm going to show you. Okay, so here is horse number 2, and she did not have a lot of pacing genes. She mostly had French blood, and French horses typically have less paces in their pedigrees in the standardbred breed. So she didn't really have any pace in her, but what she did have was a very special conformation. She was 16-2 hands, and she has a very long back, and she almost felt like a different horse depending on which lead she was cantering in. So she needed a lot of strengthening and building up before her worst side canter became bearable, and still it never really felt comfortable to ride it. In this clip she canters pretty good, but it is still something of a struggle for her, and as a rider I kind of wanted to help her. She is naturally pretty lazy, and every time I asked for a canter, she kind of wants to hold her back and throw herself into it, and it becomes really choppy, and sometimes I had to work a lot to make her carry herself. And I think that sometimes we as riders want to help the horses a bit too much, when the goal is really for the horse to find carriage and balance on its own with minimal help from the rider. Also, I want to mention that nowadays I often ride her in a western saddle, which actually spreads the weight more over her long back and it gives her more shoulder freedom. And her canter does get a little bit better in that tack. But this is a prime example of a standardbred who was born to prefer trot over canter, and I accept that, and I don't ask her to do things that she doesn't have the ability to perform. And she has still achieved open level in endurance riding, so she really can prove herself in other areas where she can use her strengths. And here's an example of her jumping. It's a very choppy jump, and she really doesn't have the technique that you would expect from a horse with a good canter. She kind of throws herself over the jump instead of actually getting round and soft. And because her technique is so poor, I in general don't jump her very high because frankly, it can be quite dangerous if the horse doesn't have the ability to balance itself after a jump. So the risk of stumbling is quite high, and this is why I have given her a different career. So here you see a standardbred with an exceptionally good canter. This is probably the best canter I've ever come across in a pure standardbred. This horse had a very brief time on the track, and he only did some baby races before he came out of training, and I decided to just train him and school him as a riding horse. And lucky for me, he was born with physical abilities that made his canter really nice and round. And you can see how round it is. And he is really making use of his shoulders, lifting himself in every stride. And he's so adaptable that he can shorten and lengthen his stride within seconds. And that makes him very balanced and rideable between the jumps. He's a very nimble horse, and it is something really useful in show jumping. And the roundness of his canter really gives him a very nice jump. And here especially you can see how round he is and how balanced he is after the jump in the landing, and how he can collect himself and shorten his stride to turn around the other jump. And the height is not going to be a problem for him. So the question is, can you still jump a horse with a pacey canter? Well, I did, and I even competed over a meter with this horse. The advantage of him was that he was very tall, so he had the range, even though he couldn't master the lengthening and shortening in between the strides. But actually, as you can see in this clip, he's a bit older here, and he's got more routine, and he really does a good job in gauging the distances and jumping round. And you can get very far with build-up of muscle, strengthening the core, and getting that canter round and getting the horse to carry itself. And I think that's one of the key points, is to get the horse to carry itself and balance itself under a rider, because these standardbreds were bred to be in a harness. They weren't bred to carry the weight of a rider. So I think this strengthening work is really important. But I think if you're considering getting a standardbred for yourself, it is worth noting that even if you can make any horse canter, the highest quality of canter is going to be limited to a large degree by the horse's genetics and the traits it has inherited. So if you get a standardbred off the track, one of the things you should probably think about is what you really want to do with this horse. Because if, for instance, you want to do show jumping or dressage, then having a good canter is almost a necessity. I think that my main message really is that you should manage your expectations and be realistic about your hopes and dreams. And of course, enjoy your horse. It's really important that they have a good life as well as you. And I think that's it. And I hope that you enjoyed this video and that it was informative for you, and hopefully it gives you an idea of your next steps. If you reached the end of this video, then I just want to say thank you for watching.